The Midnight Rose Pack believed Saraphina was broken, a wolfless omega destined for nothing but servitude and suffering. They mocked her, brutalized her, dismissed her as worthless. But beneath her fragile exterior lurked a secret so dangerous it could cost her everything. Hidden deep within her soul lived a white wolf, the rarest and most coveted creature in werewolf history, hunted mercilessly for its legendary pelt and mythical power. For 5 agonizing years, she consumed poison daily to keep her true nature buried, suffering in silence to survive. Everything changed the day Supreme Alpha Darius Nightshade arrived and commanded a mandatory pack inspection with no exceptions permitted. When they dragged Saraphina into the center of the combat arena and forced her transformation, reality itself seemed to fracture because the Supreme Alpha didn't execute her as everyone expected. Instead, he knelt before her in absolute submission, and the world would never be the same again. Liquid swirling in the small vial resembled a bruised sky, murky purple tinged with darkness. The stench was nauseating, a vile combination of decay and caramelized sugar that made her stomach turn before she even uncorked it. Saraphina's trembling fingers struggled with the glass stopper, the vial clinking softly against the chipped porcelain sink in the cramped bathroom she called her own. "Drink it," she commanded her reflection in the cracked mirror, her voice barely audible. "Drink it or face certain death." The woman staring back at her looked like a ghost haunting her own body, pale skin stretched over prominent bones, dark shadows circling eyes that once sparkled with vibrant emerald light, but now appeared dulled by exhaustion and malnutrition. At 22 years old, she appeared closer to 40. Her hands were raw and cracked from the harsh lye soap she used daily to scrub the packhouse floors, and her gray uniform, designed for the lowest-ranking omegas, hung loosely on her malnourished frame like burial shrouds. She tilted the vial back and swallowed the wolfsbane concentrate in one burning gulp. The poison seared her throat like molten metal, hitting her stomach with the force of a physical blow and twisting her insides into agonizing knots. She gripped the sink's edge until her knuckles turned bone white, retching silently while fighting desperately to keep the poison down. She couldn't vomit it back up because failure meant exposure, and exposure meant death. Deep within the recesses of her consciousness, her wolf spirit Aurora whimpered pathetically. The poison had weakened her substantially, sedating the powerful force within until she was barely a whisper in Saraphina's mind. The sensation was torture beyond description, like imprisoning a hurricane inside a glass jar, but it remained absolutely necessary for survival. If the Midnight Rose Pack ever discovered her true nature, she wouldn't be scrubbing their floors anymore. She would be mounted on their wall as a trophy, her white pelt displayed for all to admire, while her spirit screamed silently for eternity. "Saraphina, you worthless rodent! Get down here immediately!" The shrill, cutting voice of Victoria, the beta's pampered daughter, pierced through the thin floorboards like a knife. Saraphina quickly concealed the vial behind a loose brick in the deteriorating wall, splashed freezing water across her burning face, and ran downstairs as fast as her weakened legs could carry her. The kitchen was absolute chaos when she arrived, steam billowing from enormous pots while the rich aroma of roasted venison filled the air. But underneath the pleasant food smells lurked something sharper and more acrid, the unmistakable scent of collective anxiety permeating everything. The pack members were visibly tense, moving with jerky, uncertain motions. Victoria stood imperiously beside the marble island, looking flawless in a crimson silk dress that cost more than Saraphina would earn in her entire lifetime. She possessed her father's cruel mouth and predatory eyes that constantly searched for weakness like a hawk hunting field mice. "Where have you been hiding?" Victoria snapped venomously, stepping aggressively into Saraphina's personal space. She reeked of expensive imported perfume, layered over something rotten underneath. The Supreme Alpha arrives in 3 hours. 3 hours! I was cleaning the upstairs bathroom, Miss Victoria, Saraphina replied quietly, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on the floor. Direct eye contact was interpreted as challenge, and challenges resulted in savage beatings she could barely survive. Victoria scoffed dismissively and deliberately kicked over a bucket of dirty water across the tiles Saraphina had just finished drying. Well, you clearly missed several spots. Clean this mess up immediately, then get yourself to the grand ballroom. My father demands the silver be polished until he can see his reflection perfectly in every piece. Yes, Miss Victoria, Saraphina whispered, dropping to her knees and grabbing a threadbare rag. As she soaked up the spreading water, she overheard Victoria whispering excitedly to her friend Jessica, a gamma wolf. Can you actually believe the Supreme Alpha is coming here personally? Jessica whispered, her voice trembling with barely contained excitement. Supreme Alpha Darius Nightshade himself. They say he stands 7 feet tall and has killed over 100 rogues with nothing but his bare hands and pure rage. He's not here hunting rogues, Victoria said smugly, running perfectly manicured fingers through her elaborately curled blonde hair. He's searching for his destined mate. The royal oracle prophesied that his queen is hidden somewhere in the Northern Territories, and that's us. When he finally sees me, he won't need to search any further. Saraphina's heart stopped beating momentarily. Supreme Alpha Darius Nightshade, the alpha of all alphas, the living legend. The terrifying rumors about him were endless and horrifying. People claimed he could sense a wolf's complete lineage just by looking at them. They said his alpha command voice could force any wolf to shift against their will instantly. If he came here and examined her closely, everything could unravel catastrophically. The wolfsbane poison masked her scent effectively, making her smell like absolutely nothing to werewolf senses, appearing as merely a human defect tragically born to werewolf parents. That's precisely why they despised her so thoroughly. She was a broken wolf, a genetic failure, an embarrassment to their proud lineage. But the Supreme Alpha's power was ancient and absolute. If you want to know what happens when Saraphina faces the most powerful wolf alive, keep watching because this story gets absolutely insane. Panic rose in her chest like floodwaters. She desperately needed to escape, to run as far and fast as possible. But she had no money, no vehicle, and the pack borders were constantly patrolled by Beta Damien's ruthless enforcers. Damien, Victoria's father, was the one who had supposedly taken her in after her parents died in a vicious rogue attack 5 years ago. He claimed it was charitable kindness and moral obligation. In reality, he simply needed a slave to abuse without consequence. Saraphina finished mopping the floor hastily and hurried to the grand ballroom where Beta Damien stood barking orders at a terrified group of Omegas. He was a massive man with a thick neck and brutal disposition. "You there." Damien pointed one meaty finger directly at her. "Saraphina, don't imagine you're hiding in the scullery during the inspection." She froze completely. "The inspection, sir?" "The Supreme Alpha has demanded a complete pack inspection," Damien spat contemptuously. "Every member, every pledge, every servant, even broken failures like you. He wants to assess the pack's overall health personally." He stepped closer, towering over her menacingly. "You will stand in the back row. You will keep your worthless head down, and you will not embarrass me with your disgusting presence. If you do, I'll skin you alive myself." Her blood turned to ice in her veins. A full inspection meant standing in formation, which meant the Supreme Alpha would walk directly past them all, which meant being within touching distance of the most powerful wolf in existence. Aurora stirred groggily in her consciousness. "Danger," the wolf whispered weakly. "Mate, danger." Seraphina ignored that second word desperately. It had to be delirium, poison-induced hallucination, nothing more. "I have a fever, sir," she lied, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "I might be contagious. Perhaps it would be safer if I remained in the cellar, away from everyone." The brutal slap came without warning. The back of his hand connected with her cheek with tremendous force, sending her sprawling across the polished marble floor. Copper blood filled her mouth. Immediately. "I didn't ask for your worthless opinion, rodent," Damien growled viciously. "You will be there. Now get to polishing before I decide you need another lesson in obedience." Seraphina dragged herself upright painfully, wiping blood from her split lip. There was absolutely no escape possible. She was completely trapped. She could only pray desperately that the wolfsbane poison would prove strong enough to deceive even a supreme alpha. The estate's long driveway was lined with pack members standing at rigid attention. Warriors stood in front with chests puffed out artificially, desperately trying to appear formidable and intimidating. Behind them stood the families, and at the very back, hidden in the shadows cast by ancient oak trees, stood the Omegas nobody cared about. Seraphina positioned herself between a young boy named Timothy, who walked with a pronounced limp, and an elderly woman named Margaret. She had deliberately rubbed dirt across her face and neck, desperately, trying to mask any residual natural scent remaining, and had swallowed a second dose of wolfsbane an hour earlier. Her stomach felt like it was dissolving in acid. She was dizzy, sweating profusely, and trembling violently. "Steady yourself, child," Margaret whispered gently, slipping her rough, weathered hand into Seraphina's. "Just avoid eye contact. Supreme alphas don't notice dust like us." Seraphina squeezed the kind hand gratefully. "I hope you're right, Margaret." The distant sound of powerful engines rumbled ominously, a low predatory growl that vibrated in the soles of her worn-out shoes. Absolute silence fell over the assembled crowd instantly. Even the birds seemed to stop singing completely. A convoy of black-armored SUVs rounded the bend, moving with lethal predatory grace, their tinted windows concealing the occupants within. The lead vehicle, a massive SUV with the royal crest emblazoned on the door in gold and crimson, came to a halt directly in front of Beta Damien and Pack Alpha Jonathan, the weak leader who mostly let Damien control everything. The doors opened simultaneously. 12 royal guards emerged first, massive warriors wearing tactical gear, their powerful auras so overwhelming that several Omegas nearby whimpered pathetically and dropped immediately to their knees in involuntary submission. Then the back door of the lead SUV opened slowly. A boot touched the gravel, then a leg. Supreme Alpha Darius Nightshade emerged from the vehicle like a force of nature manifesting physically. He was absolutely terrifying in person. He stood well over 6.5 feet tall with impossibly broad shoulders that strained against his black dress shirt. His hair was midnight black, swept back from a face that appeared carved from granite by an unforgiving sculptor. High, sharp cheekbones, a strong jawline covered in dark stubble, and eyes that were visible even from 50 yards away. They were pure gold, molten burning gold that seemed to see directly into souls. The raw power radiating from him was a tangible physical weight that slammed into the assembled pack like a tidal wave of pure dominance. Alpha Jonathan bowed low immediately, exposing his neck in complete submission. Beta Damien followed reluctantly, though resentment was clearly visible in his expression. Victoria curtsied deeply, batting her eyelashes desperately, pathetically seeking attention. "Supreme Alpha Nightshade," Alpha Jonathan stammered nervously. "Welcome to Midnight Rose Pack. We are deeply honored by your presence." Darius didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge Alpha Jonathan's existence. He was systematically scanning the assembled crowd with those burning gold eyes. He was hunting for something specific. The oracle was extremely specific. Darius said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that vibrated physically in Saraphina's chest, making her suppressed wolf howl in absolute agony. She is here. I can feel the pull stronger than ever before. She? Alpha Jonathan asked, genuinely confused. My daughter is currently away at university, Your Majesty. Not your daughter, Darius snapped dismissively. He began walking purposefully, ignoring the warriors completely, ignoring the high-ranking members entirely. He walked straight down the center aisle, heading directly toward the back, toward the servants nobody noticed. Saraphina's heart hammered frantically against her ribs, like a trapped bird desperately seeking escape. No, please, not me, she prayed silently. Victoria stepped boldly into his path with manufactured confidence. Your Majesty, she purred seductively, surely you don't want to soil your expensive boots with the help? I have prepared an elaborate banquet in the main hall. I would absolutely love to show you personally. Darius stopped walking. He looked at Victoria for exactly one fraction of a second. Move. One single word, saturated with alpha command that could not be disobeyed. Victoria's knees buckled. Instantly. She was forced to step aside, gasping as though she had been physically slapped. Her face flushed crimson with complete humiliation, and her furious eyes found Saraphina in the back row. She mouthed the words silently, "You will pay dearly for this." As if it was somehow Saraphina's fault the Supreme Alpha wasn't interested in cheap perfume and desperate advances. Darius continued walking with absolute purpose. The terrified crowd parted instantly like the Red Sea before Moses. He was getting closer with every step. 20 yards away. 10 yards. Saraphina stared fixedly at his boots, polished black leather reflecting the afternoon sun like mirrors. He stopped walking. He was standing directly in front of her. The air surrounding him smelled of rain, cedar, and ozone, the distinctive scent of a massive storm about to break overhead. It was the most intoxicating smell she had ever experienced in her entire life. Despite the poison coursing through her veins, Aurora scratched, desperately at the mental walls Saraphina had constructed. "Mate!" the wolf screamed frantically. "Our mate is here!" Saraphina clamped her mental shields down with desperate force. "Be silent," she begged internally. "He will kill us both." "Look at me," the Supreme Alpha commanded, his voice unmistakably directed at her alone. She trembled violently. If she looked up, he would see the defiance in her eyes. He would see the intelligence she tried to hide. He would see the wolf she had buried. "I said, look at me," Darius repeated firmly. His hand reached out, warm, calloused fingers gently tipping her chin upward. She was forced to meet his intense gaze against her will. Gold met emerald green. Time stopped completely. The sounds of the assembled pack faded away into absolute silence. It was just her and him, connected by something ancient and undeniable. She watched his pupils dilate dramatically, swallowing the molten gold. She witnessed a flicker of confusion cross his features, followed by intense, burning curiosity. "What is your name?" he asked softly, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Saraphina," she whispered. "Just Saraphina, Your Majesty." He frowned, leaning in closer until his face was inches from hers. He inhaled deeply right at the crook of her neck, where her scent should be strongest. She flinched involuntarily. He was smelling the sickness, the rot of concentrated wolfsbane poison. "You are extremely ill," he observed, his commanding voice shifting to genuine concern. "You smell of death and decay." "I have a medical condition, sir," she stammered quickly, reciting the practiced lies she had perfected over 5 years. "My blood is weak. I have no wolf spirit." Darius's golden eyes narrowed with obvious suspicion. He didn't believe her story. She could see it clearly. He could sense the unnatural void where her scent should naturally be. But he could also sense something powerful underneath it all, something extraordinary struggling to break free. "No, wolf," he murmured thoughtfully. Then why does my wolf want to tear this entire world apart to protect you from harm? The assembled crowd gasped collectively in shock. Beta Damien stepped forward aggressively, his face turning purple with barely controlled rage. Your Majesty, that is merely a servant girl, a genetic defective. She's lying to you deliberately. She is absolutely nothing of value. Darius didn't look away from Saraphina's face. I will be the sole judge of what she is. He finally released her chin, but his intense gaze lingered on her lips meaningfully. The inspection will proceed as planned, but this one, he pointed directly at her. She comes to the front. I want to see her shift immediately. Her blood turned to ice instantly. Your Majesty, I can't, she protested desperately. I told you I have no wolf spirit. Every creature has a spirit, Darius said, his voice hardening noticeably. Tonight under the blood moon we will see yours clearly, if you are truly wolfless as you claim. You have nothing to fear from me. But if you are hiding something from your supreme alpha, he let the deadly threat hang in the air between them. He turned and walked away confidently, his ceremonial cape billowing dramatically behind him. Saraphina stood there, completely paralyzed with terror. The wolfsbane suppressed forced transformation effectively under normal circumstances, but the blood moon forced transformation even in the weakest wolves without exception. And with the Supreme Alpha's command added to that natural compulsion, the dosage she had taken wouldn't be nearly enough to stop it. If she shifted tonight, she wouldn't just transform into any wolf. She would become the white wolf of legend, the ultimate target, and she would be shifting directly in front of the man who ruled their entire world with absolute authority. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next part will absolutely blow your mind. The sun began setting slowly, casting long, bloody shadows across the training arena. The Midnight Rose Pack had transformed the dusty combat ring overnight into an elaborate spectacle. Burning torches lined the entire perimeter, flames dancing against the darkening sky. Saraphina was being held in a detention pen with other questionable wolves, young ones who hadn't shifted yet and elderly ones past their prime. But unlike them, she was specifically guarded. Two of Damien's brutal enforcers stood by the locked gate, watching her constantly. Look at her pathetic trembling, one sneered cruelly. Supreme Alpha's probably going to execute her for wasting his valuable time. Hope he gives her to us first for entertainment. The other laughed darkly. She sat in the dirt, hugging her knees tightly to her chest. She had attempted to run immediately after the lineup, bolting desperately for the woods, but Damien had anticipated her escape perfectly. His men had tackled her brutally before she even reached the tree line. They had confiscated her precious vial of wolfsbane poison. She was beginning withdrawal. The protective poison was wearing off rapidly. The fever was being replaced by a deep, aching itch beneath her skin. Her bones felt like they were vibrating at a frequency just beyond hearing. Aurora was waking up fully, and she was absolutely furious after 5 years of forced sedation. "Let me out," the wolf growled in her mind. "They threaten us. We kill them all." "No," Saraphina thought back frantically. "If you emerge, we both die. Supreme Alpha Darius will see you." "Darius is our mate," Aurora argued insistently. "Darius is a Supreme Alpha who executes anomalies to maintain peace and order," Saraphina countered desperately. The ceremonial drums started pounding rhythmically. The enforcers grabbed her roughly by both arms and dragged her out of the detention pen. "Showtime, freak," one hissed viciously. The arena was packed beyond capacity. Temporary bleachers had been erected, filled with hundreds of pack members. In the center on an elevated platform sat Supreme Alpha Darius on an ornate velvet throne. Alpha Jonathan and Beta Damien sat below him subserviently. Darius looked bored as he watched young wolves shift one by one in demonstration. A boy shifted into a brown wolf. Darius nodded approval. A girl shifted into a gray one. He waved her away dismissively. He was waiting for something specific. When the guards dragged Saraphina into the center of the ring, the massive crowd went completely silent. The dirt felt cold under her bare feet. She wore only a thin white shift dress, shivering in the night air. The moon was rising steadily. It was enormous, heavy, and tinted a deep rust red. The blood moon. The supernatural pull was instantaneous and overwhelming. A scream built in her throat as her bones began heating up dramatically. It felt like her marrow was literally boiling. Without the chemical suppressants, the shift was coming fast and violently destructive. "Saraphina Vance!" Beta Damien announced, his amplified voice echoing across the arena, claiming status wolfless, accused of deception and fraud. Darius stood up from his throne and walked to the platform's edge, looking down at her intensely. The distance between them felt non-existent despite the physical space. "The moon calls to all of us," Darius said softly, though his voice carried across the silent arena perfectly. "Do not fight it. Show me what you truly are." "I can't," she cried out desperately, falling to her knees as a violent spasm of pain racked her spine. "Please don't make me shift," Damien bellowed furiously. He pulled a shock baton from his belt and jammed it viciously into her ribs. Electric currents tore through her body. She screamed in absolute agony, arching her back. The pain completely shattered her concentration. The mental walls she had built around Aurora crumbled instantly. "Enough!" Darius roared, jumping down from the platform. He moved to stop Damien, but it was already too late. The trigger had been pulled irreversibly. Her back bowed impossibly. The sound of cracking bones echoed through the arena, loud as gunshots. The crowd gasped in collective horror. Usually shifting was fluid and painless. This was violent and agonizing. It was 5 years of suppression breaking all at once. She screamed one final time, a sound that shifted from human to animal halfway through. Her vision went crimson. She felt her jaw extending painfully, her teeth sharpening to razor points. Her hands clawed into the dirt, transforming into massive paws. Fur burst from her skin explosively, not brown like a worker, not gray like a warrior, not black like an alpha. It was white, blinding, pure diamond white that glowed like starlight. She shook her massive head, shaking off the shredded remains of her human clothes. She stood up on 4 powerful legs. She was huge, larger than any female wolf should naturally be, nearly the size of an alpha male. Her fur glowed brilliantly in the moonlight, stark against the dark dirt. A collective gasp sucked all air from the stadium. Absolute terrified silence followed. A white wolf, the mark of ancient royalty, the mark of the moon goddess's direct bloodline. A creature that hadn't been seen in over a century. She snarled viciously, snapping her jaws at Damien, who scrambled back in pure terror, dropping his baton. "Run!" her instinct screamed. She turned to bolt toward the exit, but a massive dark shape blocked her path completely. It was Darius. He had shifted mid-leap. He was a monster of a wolf, pitch black, towering over her impressively, his eyes glowing molten gold. He was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. She bared her teeth, preparing to fight to the death. She would die fighting rather than submit. But the enormous black wolf didn't attack. He lowered his massive head submissively. He whined, a sound of longing and absolute reverence. And then in front of the entire Midnight Rose pack, in front of nobles and warriors and the cruel Beta, the Supreme Alpha lowered his powerful body to the ground. He bowed in complete submission. Hit that like button right now if you want to see what happens next, because this gets absolutely crazy. The silence in the arena was heavier than the humid night air pressing down. It was a physical weight crushing the hundreds of wolves who had just witnessed the impossible. The Supreme Alpha, the conqueror of territories, the man who had executed entire bloodlines for treason, was on his belly submitting to the starving, abused Omega girl they had forced to scrub their toilets. Her wolf Aurora was vibrating with mixture of smug satisfaction and terrifying power. "He knows," she purred in Saraphina's consciousness. "He knows exactly what we are." She stood there, a massive white wolf glowing like a fallen star in the dirt ring's center. She was confused beyond measure. Her instinct screamed to run, but her soul commanded her to stay. The black wolf before her didn't feel threatening. He felt like home. Then the fragile spell shattered completely. "Trickery!" The scream came from Beta Damien. He had scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of purple rage and panic. He grabbed the microphone, feedback, screeching. "Do not be fooled," Damien bellowed, pointing a trembling finger accusingly. "She is a witch using illusion spells. No Omega transforms into a white wolf. Kill the beast before she curses us all." The enforcers hesitated visibly. They looked from Damien to the kneeling Supreme Alpha, completely unsure whose command to follow. "I said kill her!" Damien screamed, grabbing a silver-tipped spear from a nearby guard. He lunged forward. He didn't make it 3 steps. The black wolf Darius moved with speed that defied physics. He was a blur of shadow. He slammed into Damien with tremendous force, his massive jaws clamping around the Beta's armored chest plate. Metal crunched and buckled. Damien shrieked as he was thrown 30 feet across, the arena crashing into the stone barricade with a sickening thud. Darius didn't pursue him. Instead, he turned back to Saraphina protectively. He stood guard, placing his massive black body between her and the rest of the pack. He let out a roar, a sound so deep it rattled teeth. It wasn't just noise. It was an alpha command amplified by royal blood. "Submit." It hit the crowd like a shockwave. Every single wolf in the stands, Alpha Jonathan, Victoria, the warriors, the families, dropped instantly to their knees. Some fell flat on their faces, whining in terror. The power of his voice forced them down irresistibly. Only Saraphina remained standing. Darius turned to her, his golden eyes softening noticeably. He nudged her shoulder gently with his wet nose, a gesture of infinite gentleness. "Shift back," his voice echoed in her head through an impossible mind link that should only exist between mated pairs. "Shift back now. I have you. You are completely safe with me." She was utterly exhausted. The transformation, the lack of wolfsbane, the adrenaline, it was too much. Her legs gave out. The white fur receded gradually, her bones cracking and reshaping as she melted back into human form. She collapsed onto the cold dirt, naked and shivering uncontrollably. Before she could even process the shame of her nudity, warm, heavy weight descended on her shoulders. Darius had shifted back too. He was shirtless, his chest heaving, but he had ripped his long ceremonial cloak from his shoulders and wrapped it around her protectively. He scooped her up into his powerful arms as if she weighed absolutely nothing. "My Supreme Alpha," Alpha Jonathan stammered from where he knelt, his forehead pressed to the dirt. "We didn't know. We thought she was—" Darius didn't look at him. He looked down at Saraphina, his eyes tracing the bruises covering her arms, the scars on her neck from years of systematic abuse, the emaciated curve of her ribs. His expression went from tender to apocalyptic in a heartbeat. "You didn't know?" Darius whispered, his voice deadly quiet. "You didn't know that you were starving a moon daughter, that you were beating a white wolf systematically." He looked up, scanning the terrified faces. "Pray to your gods," Darius said, his voice echoing, "because I am going to burn this pack to the ground, and I will start with anyone who ever raised a hand against her." He turned and walked toward the waiting SUVs, carrying her against his chest. As she drifted into unconsciousness, the last thing she saw was Victoria's face in the crowd. She wasn't looking at the Supreme Alpha. She was looking at Saraphina, and her expression wasn't fear. It was pure homicidal hatred promising revenge. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens to Victoria, because karma is coming for her hard. Saraphina woke up in a bed softer than clouds. For a moment, she panicked instinctively, reaching for her bucket and rag, expecting to hear Victoria screaming at her to wake up. But her hands touched silk sheets, not cold stone. "Easy, little wolf," a deep voice said gently. She bolted upright. She was in a massive room. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking a dense, misty forest stretching for miles. A fire crackled warmly in a stone hearth, and sitting in a leather armchair beside the bed was Supreme Alpha Darius. He looked different. He had bathed and changed into a fresh black shirt, but the intensity remained. He watched her like she was a rare diamond he feared would shatter. "Where am I?" she croaked, her throat feeling raw. "You are in the royal wing of the Obsidian Guest House," Darius said calmly. He stood up and poured a glass of water, handing it to her carefully. "Drink. You are severely dehydrated." She took the glass, her hands shaking noticeably. "You didn't kill me." Darius let out a dark laugh. He sat on the bed's edge, careful not to touch her. "Kill you, Saraphina? Do you have any idea what you actually are?" She looked down at the water. "I'm a freak, a genetic defect. That's what Damien always said." "Damien is a fool who will beg for death before I finish with him," Darius growled. He took a deep breath, reining in his temper. "Saraphina, look at me." She met his gold eyes hesitantly. "You are not a defect," he said firmly. "You are a white wolf. In the old legends before the wars, white wolves were the queens. They were the direct conduit to the moon goddess. They were healers, peacemakers, and destroyers. They went extinct 100 years ago, or so we all thought." Her head was spinning. "But my parents were just regular wolves, omegas." Darius shook his head. "I had my investigators examine your file while you slept. Your parents were found dead 5 years ago, yes, but they weren't your biological parents. DNA tests confirmed it this morning." She froze completely. "What?" "You were stolen, Saraphina," Darius said softly. "You were taken as a pup. Someone knew what you were. They hid you in the Midnight Rose Pack, buried you in filth and abuse to mask your scent, to keep you weak so you wouldn't present." "Why?" she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "Why would anyone do that?" "Because," Darius said, his hand finally reaching out to brush a stray hair from her face. Sparks flew where his skin touched hers, the mate bond flaring to life. "A white wolf is the only creature powerful enough to challenge a supreme alpha, or to make him infinitely stronger." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a rumble. "I have searched the entire world for you, not because of prophecy, but because my soul has been half empty my entire life. When I saw you in that dirt, I didn't see a servant. I saw my queen." She pulled back slightly, overwhelmed completely. "I'm not a queen, Darius. I don't know how to rule. I know how to scrub floors. I know how to hide and survive." "Then I will teach you everything," he swore solemnly. "But first we must balance the scales." The door opened. A royal guard stepped in, bowing low. "Your Majesty, the tribunal is ready. The prisoners are secured." Darius's eyes turned hard as flint. He stood up and extended his hand to her. "Come, you hid for 5 years. Today you stop hiding. Today you judge those who judged you." 3 months had passed since the day the floors of the Midnight Rose Pack House shook with the voice of a goddess. The royal capital, the Silver Citadel, sat high in the northern peaks, a fortress of white marble and glass that seemed to float above the clouds. The air was different here. It didn't smell of industrial cleaner, damp basements, or fear. It smelled of pine, snow, and absolute freedom. Saraphina stood on the balcony of the royal suite, her hands resting on cold stone. Below her, the city sprawled out like a blanket of stars, thousands of lights flickering in twilight. She looked down at herself. Gone were the gray rags of the Omega. She wore a gown of heavy white. velvet embroidered with silver threads forming intricate wolves running along the hem. Her hair, once brittle and dull from malnutrition, now cascaded down her back in thick, shiny waves, smelling of jasmine and honey. "You're doing it again," a familiar voice said warmly. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The air shifted, becoming warmer, charged with the electric static of the mate bond. Supreme Alpha Darius stepped onto the balcony. He wasn't wearing his armor or intimidating suits. He wore a simple white shirt unbuttoned at the top, sleeves rolled up revealing strong marked forearms that had held her together when she was falling apart. He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his solid chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. "Doing what?" she asked, leaning into him, letting his strength seep into her bones. "Looking for the cracks," Darius murmured, his voice vibrating against her spine. "I see you, Saraphina. You look at the horizon, but you're checking the floor. You're waiting for someone to come in and tell you missed a spot. You're waiting for the dream to end." She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "I spent 5 years looking at the ground, Darius. I spent 5 years trying to make myself small enough that Victoria wouldn't notice me. It's hard to unlearn the habit of being invisible." Darius turned her around gently but firmly, his golden eyes locking onto hers. "You are not invisible. You are the beacon that every wolf in this kingdom is looking toward. Tonight is your coronation. Tonight I place a crown on your head, and you take your place not behind me, but beside me, as my equal." "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I know how to survive, Darius. I don't know how to rule. What if I fail? What if I'm not the queen they think I am?" Darius smiled, a rare soft expression reserved only for her. "A tyrant rules with certainty," he said. "A true queen rules with doubt because it means she cares about the consequences. You know what it is to be hungry, Saraphina. You know what it is to be cold and powerless. That makes you more qualified to sit on that throne than anyone born in a palace." He reached into his pocket. "I have something for you. The crown jewels are for the public. They are heavy, cold things. But this is for you personally." He pulled out a small black velvet box and snapped it open. Inside wasn't a diamond the size of an egg or a ruby. It was a ring, simple and elegant, forged from white gold. Set into the center was a rough, unpolished stone, obsidian. She looked up at him, confused. "It's volcanic glass," Darius corrected, sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "It is created when earth and fire collide. It is born from pressure and heat. It is dark, yes, but if you hold it up to the light—" He lifted her hand toward the moon. The rough black stone suddenly caught the light, shimmering with hidden translucent sharpness. "It shines," he finished. "Just like you. You survived the darkness, Saraphina, but you didn't let it turn you into stone. You let it turn you into a diamond." Tears pricked her eyes. She looked at the ring, a reminder of where she came from and a promise of where she was going. "I love you, Darius," she whispered. "And I love you, Saraphina," he replied, leaning down to brush his lips against hers. "My white wolf, my queen, my entire life." The kiss was slow and deep, sealing the promise between them. It wasn't just passion, it was partnership. Somewhere in the distance from the barracks below, a wolf howled, then another, then another. A chorus of howls rose from the city, a song of celebration for the coronation. She pulled back, looking out at the kingdom that was now hers to protect. She closed her eyes and reached deep inside, finding the white wolf that had been caged for so long. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was standing tall, her fur glowing, her spirit unbroken. She threw her head back and let Aurora answer. Her howl tore through the night air, pure, powerful and commanding. It harmonized with Darius's deep roar, the white wolf and the black supreme alpha singing together under the moon. She had hidden her true self for 5 years just to survive. But tonight, as the moon watched over them, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The hiding was over. The reign of the white wolf had finally begun. And that is the story of Saraphina and the white wolf, from a floor-scrubbing omega to the most powerful queen the world has ever seen, proving that no matter how much dirt they throw on you, a diamond still shines. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, magic, and romance, please hit that like button because it really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. What do you think Saraphina's first decree as queen should be? Let me know in the comments below because I read every single one.